Well, everyone, welcome to another episode of the Future of Team podcast. Today is a very special day for us because we've been pre-recording these episodes and getting ahead a little bit before we officially launch. But today is like the first full day kind of after launch. And so Dee and I have been, just looking at the different things.
Celebrating a little bit.
Celebrating. And that's a really important thing to do in an open people first culture, is not just to do the work, but to celebrate the wins. So
Absolutely.
Today we are celebrating a win that our first episode went live. Yay! We went public. We launched the Future of Team website. We did the full rebrand. It's all out there. I don't have a ton of metrics on it yet, but I can say that it was the #1 viewed blog post on my personal blog, which coincidentally only started a couple weeks ago, but still it's good. The numbers are good. So congratulations to us. Dee, awesome. So glad that we're able to do it and get it out there.
I'm so glad to be a part of it and so thrilled to see. I mean, I haven't gone back and listened to the episode yet, and partly it's like, because there's a cringe in me going, that was our first episode, and I know that it's got all of those first day vibes, because I look at our conversations now, even just from the experience I've been in them, knowing how much more comfortable we are. So I'm like, I don't really want to go back and listen, but I've had good friends listen to it and come back and say, hey Dee, it sounds really great. So I will, and I'll get up the nerve to go and do it, or listen or watch the YouTube video. And
I had to edit the episode, so I've listened to it about 12
different
times. And then I had to upload it, the audio version, to the website, so I had to listen to it there, and then I had to do it for YouTube as well and listen to it there and run the whole thing. So I'm quite familiar with at least the
does it sound good? You're happy with it? You're happy with it?
There is a little Easter egg at the end. So if you go to the last 10 seconds when we sign off, there is, you'll laugh. You'll go, oh no, James, I can't believe you kept that in. But there's this moment where we end and then we stop and then you go, we did it. And I left that in.
I'm so cute. Well done, James. Congratulations. I know it's been a labor of love and commitment, and me getting up early in the morning. I congratulate myself for doing that, because of course we're on the opposite sides of the world, but it's a thrill to be a part of it, and I'm so glad that now people actually get to hear our conversations, because I've been loving them. When it's just been an audience of 2, it's going to be great to hear other people getting a listen as well.
I'm really curious what they're going to say, like how people are going to contribute to the conversation, what kind of feedback we're going to get, because now that it's out there, we're not just going to get the positive vibes. The people who care about us and the people who care about what we're doing, right, are going to be listening with a bit of a critical ear, going, okay, you're good, but right? Or I wonder if, like all those things that
well, I completely disagree with, and so bring it on. I'm so ready. I'm mostly ready. I think I'm ready.
Which is probably the best way to segue into our topic. We are starting
that's where you're going.
A 3-week mini series on the concept of feedback. Now, I call it a 3-week mini or a 3-episode mini series only because we've got 3 kind of feedbacky episodes in a row. Are we starting? No, I guess this is kind of like week 2, maybe? I don't know. We started in the last episode with cultivating a high performance culture, which is a good foundational layer for this. And this week we're talking about feedback and performance reviews. And then in the next episode after this, it's about performance improvement and what those conversations are like. So we've got a lot to cover. But just to give you a sense, the whole idea of this episode is to really talk about not just feedback and performance reviews, but how to make the whole experience constructive, safe, welcoming, inclusive, not this high pressure, high stress, high anxiety experience for both the person giving the feedback and the person receiving the feedback. So, probably tall order, but we'll at least crack it, I think, a little bit. At least I hope.
I hope so. I think you kind of, when I hear that, um, how to reduce the anxiety around it, I think like the first element that we want to talk about is that feedback thrives in a failure friendly environment, right? So I can immediately, if I'm thinking around those lines, I can immediately get that sense of, if it's okay to fail, then that anxiety disappears, right? So that whole sense of, oh crap, pardon me, I have to tell somebody that there's some adjustment needed. What is the environment that I'm doing that look like?
Amazing. Absolutely right.
Yeah.
So we've feedback thrives in a failure friendly environment. And
Right.
the reason why we say that, and we've discussed it a little bit, is that it matters how people feel going into it, and the environment that you're creating. I have, I'm highly perfection oriented. I have a lot of stress around not getting the details right and not having people perceive me the way that I hope that they will perceive me. And so I naturally create a failure averse sort of like sense just in myself. I get really anxious about all of that kind of stuff. And I have had experiences with leaders where they have told me to my face, "Hey, it is okay if this doesn't go well, or it is okay if you make a mistake. We are doing this together. We are navigating whatever is happening together, and it's learning for all of us."
Yeah.
And for me, like, because I already worked myself up, that has been hugely valuable. And I mean, we see it, right? Like we see it in a lot of other environments. You know, the example I've seen others use is, you know, if you're a swimmer and you're swimming, you know, professionally or as an athlete to sort of do that, you have a coach, and the coach is literally there telling you to shave your legs a little bit closer to your skin so that you can shave off those 10 extra milliseconds from your time,
Yeah.
right? And if you miss a spot, it shows up in your time. And if you do
Yeah.
your stroke wrong, it shows up in your time. And you both have that shared goal, that shared mission of what you're
Yeah.
trying to achieve, and you create that failure friendly environment, or that space to do that.
It's
And
that, well, it's
yeah.
failure friendly, and it's also that sense of, I think you nailed it too when you said we are all learning. This is an
Yeah.
opportunity for all of us to learn. So it's that these all of these things have become embedded in the company culture, right? What
Mm.
is our culture? Are we talking and motivated by and driven towards, which is the same thing as motivated by, anyway, continuous improvement? If we have the sense of, hey, there is always something that we can improve, that we can do better, that is going to get us closest to our goal. And that's not a sense of we need to continuously improve to be perfect, but we need to continuously improve because there are spaces that we want to take up that we haven't been able to, or that we, areas that we want to get into. And I, having worked in various different places with various kind of levels of failure friendliness, I
Mm.
think um, it's critical. I mean, I think of all the times that I've been given feedback or that I've given people feedback, that when you're in that space where, hey, this is something that we're all in, and we are all um, not encouraged to fail, but we are all supported when things don't go the way that we are, just makes a massive difference to people's ability to experiment, right? If you know that it's okay to screw this up, there's so much less rigidity in what you'll be inclined to try. And so in being able to do that, being also able to be course corrected is also mission critical to be able to move forward. That's where the feedback comes in.
It's so, the first spot for you as a leader or for you as somebody receiving feedback, because this is the other thing too. You cannot receive feedback if you are stressed or it's psychologically unsafe or you're afraid of failure or whatever it is. Like you as the person receiving the feedback aren't going to receive it well or aren't going to be able to internalize it the way you need to. So as leaders and as people receiving feedback or whatever that dynamic is, the receiver and the giver, you both have to assess your environment and really do that check and set that up properly. So for some folks, it may not exist throughout the rest of the organization, and that's something you have to be aware of. But you have control over the dynamic of the relationship that you have with the person that you are giving or receiving feedback with.
Can I also, like, I kind of want to caveat that. I think the other thing that what it feels like we're talking about at the moment is a dynamic between manager and report. But there is also, in a failure-friendly environment, is there also not that sense of, can the leaders receive feedback as well?
Yeah.
So when you see this working at its best, this is something that applies to everybody. This is not just in a hierarchical top-down sense. This is, hey, we're all open to this. We're all open to learning from C-suite down to whatever the, most basic level is in the company. Being able for this to thrive, this sense is something that crosses all of those boundaries. This is not just a manager report situation, in my opinion.
We're spending a lot of time, I think, quite intentionally on environment and setting up the right conditions, because without that, it just doesn't work.
Well, I just have this vision of somebody listening to us and going, oh, well, I need to be able to give feedback, reading Radical Candor, and then blasting their team. And I would hate for that to happen to anybody, and which is why it's so important to go, hang on, we just need to set this stuff up first before you actually start diving in, because, I don't want anybody to get hurt.
That's right. And then come back and say, "Oh, I heard it on the Future of Team podcast," and they told me.
I know. We need a disclaimer
in the real world. We gotta be careful.
But yeah.
Well.
Okay, so if we've got that set up, what happens next?
So we want to talk now, I think, a little bit about like setting up effective feedback systems. What does that look like? And the first thing that I wrote down as we were talking about this was this idea of cadence, right? That feedback, good feedback is given as close to the moment of, whatever happened as possible. So that you read Radical Candor, you read other books about feedback, and they will tell you as close as possible to the moment when a situation happened that requires the feedback that you can give, the better, because it's fresher in everyone's memory of what happened, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes that's not possible, but I think the worst thing you can do is document the feedback or squirrel it away in the back of your head and wait a year to add that to a
performance review. I have a story. Do you want a story? I can give you a story. In my very early days of my career, this is long before I ever became a project manager, I was working in childcare. I was an assistant in the childcare centre. And in my first 3 months, I was on probation. And the outfit that I worked for didn't really want me there. I think they thought very early on, Dee is not a great fit here. and they saved up every infraction that they could think of until my interview for my, and I had no idea what was coming. It was so funny because anyway, there's a whole other story related to swearing around that I probably can't go into when we're in broadcast, but I had never sworn before using particular words that I used after that event in the car park of this childcare centre because I was just hit all of a sudden with all of this criticism and all of these terrible things that I'd done, and I had no idea what was coming. I also had no idea I was just about to lose my job, but that's a whole other episode for another day. But yeah, that sense of, hey, if you need to course correct, you need to do it early.
And a good lead, right, and a good teammate will be looking to help you grow, whether that, regardless,
100%.
right, or help you do it well or to the best of your ability, right, and do that course correcting. So let's talk, I guess, a little bit about like where feedback can happen. In my one-on-ones with my direct reports, I work really hard to create space for feedback. So I always ask for feedback, and I always, try to make that space where that can happen. We don't always use it, but I find it helpful just as sort of like an indicator and a permission granter to folks that lets them know that that's important. I try to proactively set up regular meetings with people at the same level as me, like what you would call colleagues, whether that's other managers, if I'm in management, or other individual contributors, just to sort of like and in those conversations do the same thing. Just try to ask for feedback and try to make that a regular part of things. But there are other spots and in a cadence that you can do too. We've talked about annual reviews, which I think are really good. But if that's the only time that you are giving people permission, right, to provide feedback, that's not enough, right? Just even from a performance point of view, right, or performance management,
I mean, I get why some places would do an annual reviews, right? Because then performance becomes tied to salary negotiation.
Right.
So I can cut, but I think if what you're trying to do is set up a high performance culture, if you're a company that wants to continuously improve, that's just not enough in general, let alone the conversation about whether, to what extent salary gets tied in. So kind of one of the better experiences I had was that we obviously had fortnightly one-to-ones or monthly one-to-one, was fortnightly one-to-ones with my team lead, but also quarterly check-ins. Now, 2 of those would be performance reviews effectively that were peer reviews, so that we would be peer review conversations. And so then everybody gets to have an opinion about about how you're doing and how you're tracking, but initially quite challenging for people, but incredibly valuable. And then on the other, so those would happen twice a year, and then you would have on the other quarters, there were other, I can't remember exactly what they were called, but there are other reviews that were much more related. So it was peer review, performance review. And so every quarter there's that check-in. And the interesting thing is that as it became more embedded into what we were doing, it became less intense and scary, because we really got used to, you get used to, okay, I'm going to take all this feedback, I see all this feedback that is given to me from my peers, I can take every line of it as a personal criticism, or I can go, yep, that aligns and I think they're onto something there, or I don't receive that, because there is always that sense too of, doesn't all have to be accurate, but that cadence was really helpful. So every 3 months there was something structured that everybody was going through, that gave us some of these course correction opportunities.
So that's good for your personal performance, maybe, and then that sort of one-on-one type thing, and even the peer feedback is good. Another spot I always found really helpful, or tend to find helpful, is sprint retros.
Oh, for sure.
Creating a cadence where, at a project level or at a team level, you're having that conversation where you're all equals, right?
Yeah.
And you have that. I love it when it's facilitated personally, right? Like when you've got a scrum master or somebody who comes in as a project manager, program manager, and is sitting there with you going, how did you feel the sprint went? Right. And for those who don't know, by the way, I should mention this too. You used a word that is very Aussie, which was fortnightly. And for listeners who maybe aren't in Australia, that means once
Radio
every
reset.
2 weeks.
Yeah. Hey, people have been listening in the last couple of weeks to Taylor Swift's new album, right? And the lead song on that is Fortnite. If they haven't got it now, surely it will become part of the vernacular. It's so sensible.
It's right up there with the word whilst. Whilst is not used in North America.
But it's not used here either. I would vehemently disagree that is similar to Fortnite.
I used to work in comms, and you have no idea how many Aussie write-ups I had to go through and say, we're using US English, which means we use the word while, not whilst.
That's wild. That's hilarious.
But anyway, I digress.
I appreciate that.
Sprint retros, quarterly reviews, annual reviews, one-on-ones, the cadence matters, and those are some good systemic things that you as a leader, or you as at an organizational level, not just at a team level, but at an organizational level, can really implement to create the kind of feedback structure that creates permission. Permission being the next point we actually have here, which is giving permission to your team to actually document some of the things that are going on, both on the challenge side and the success side. And this is one that I added, but it comes out of some things that I've seen happen in performance reviews, and I've had happen to myself because I'm notoriously bad at documenting my own successes, right? I just sort of let them go. But when it comes time for your quarterly check-in or your annual performance review or whatever that cadence is, if you've not actually been self-reflecting, right, or self-celebrating, that space becomes much harder to fill constructively, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that as a team lead or as an organizational lead, reminding your staff, your employees, your team to write that down when they do something great, or you're writing things down.
Sorry, have you come across Julie Evans's brag document?
No.
When I was at Human Made, somebody shared this. And we'll throw a link to this in the show notes, but Julie Evans wrote a really good article about keeping this whole thing of writing everything down because you forget. Yeah. And you know what humans are like, right? We remember the bad stuff before we remember the good stuff. We remember those moments where we cringed and did something that we wish we hadn't. And she has this whole template for it. And I actually ended up taking that template, and I have a Notion document that I keep. Basically, Notion runs my life. But anyway, I have a template of this brag document that I recycle every year and write down all of those things that, like, hey, this month we got our team through this. This month we learned this, so that when it comes to my performance review at the end of the year, I'm not scrambling in that last month that goes, oh, I'm scanning through my Asana boards or scanning through my calendar to go, what happened this year? And so it's just really helpful. It was just really helpful for me to have a structured document that go, hey, this is what and this is what my goals are, and this is where we're going to go next year. But
because keep in mind, our goal here is to create an effective feedback system.
right.
And, we say this, I think, every episode at this point. We're like a broken record, but leadership is intentional. You have to be intentional about these kinds of things. And so, yeah, it's just is what it is. The other thing that we had on this was getting and giving permission for feedback. You had put this down about getting permission for feedback, which I just thought was really good.
I was talking to somebody that I'm mentoring recently about this, actually, and it was she was saying, I've got this person, he's proving challenging to navigate around and manage. And I was asking, and she's like, and I'm going to confront him. And I was asking her, exactly how are you planning to do this? And of course, I come to everything with a sense of curiosity. I ask a lot of questions. I don't do a lot of telling. That's something that I've learned. But one of the things that I suggested to her was this thing that I've been doing consistently through my years of leadership is, and this doesn't have to, is setting up that conversation. Do you mind if I make an observation about something? And immediately the person on the other side of that question has to go, okay, something's coming. So that you're giving them just a moment to mentally prepare, or like a long moment. Just this is something that I would often do in text on Slack or wherever. But and then they consent to it. They might say no, in which case you just walk away and go. You have to navigate how you manage not being able. But I have never had anybody say no. Because then they give that consent, and then you can have that conversation. I have observed, this is what I'm seeing, this is what the impact of that was. How do you respond to that? How do you, what do you think? And so that sense of that moment has, feedback I've received on all of that is just the invaluable nature of being able to say, to just that microsecond of mental preparation to go, okay, or I'm coming into a meeting, I've got a planning, you've got a meeting scheduled, or there's an ad hoc meeting. Hey, I'd like to talk through some stuff. Would you mind? And changes the dynamic. My experience changes the dynamic immediately.
It's very interesting that you say that, because in Australia, there's some labor laws around feedback where, from my understanding is, and I'm not a legal expert, so you cannot take this as legal advice, but my understanding is that you have to provide at least 24 hours notice to somebody when you're going to be having a
interesting
performance or sort of related conversation, and you have to give them the permission to bring somebody in the room with them, right? If they want to do that. That's a bit more formal. That's kind of like
that's the
when
kind
you're
of
on a path, which we'll talk about next week.
About next week.
Improvement or next episode. But in that is that mental preparation. Hey, you're going into a conversation that is going to have elements of feedback, constructive or otherwise, that you need to be, able to hear or willing to hear.
It can be as simple also, though, as, hey, Slack conversations, even, I've been in places where the constant flow of information in Slack is a lot. And you'll see something, I might have seen a reference where one of the things that we worked on fairly early on was eliminating the word guys in general conversation, right? And when somebody on autumn does it without thinking, can't even remember what the word for that is, but if they drop it in there, I'll send a DM. Do you mind if I make an observation about a conversation? Sure, go ahead. Hey, on this thing here, you said this is not something that we do. Would you be able to correct on that? So this is not just, I just wanted to kind of clarify, this is all the way through, not just on those kind of some of those big conversations. There's that sense of, because we have that vibe, that environment where that's okay to happen.
Well, that's what I was going to say is, like in Australia, they have that built into that process because they recognize the need for getting permission or creating mental space, right? And you were talking about that microsecond of mental space to prepare. And I think that that's really valuable as a takeaway for anyone in any situation where you are planning to give feedback, is that granting somebody that mental space to prepare for what you're about to say can be really invaluable. In fact, you want to talk about defensiveness, ratcheting up the tension. Don't give them that mental space. Just jump right in and see what happens, right? The walls go up, the emotions go up, the volume gets louder, right? Like it's literally the opposite of the result that you want, right? You're not going to get a behavior change. You're going to get a behavior spiral out of that.
Yeah. Do you know the thing that we haven't covered here? I'm sitting and looking at our list is cross-cultural feedback.
I was just thinking that, because like even between
us, cross-cultural, Canada, Australia.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
But giving feedback, I've worked with people in South Asia, whole different tenor to the conversation. And I think we need to do an episode at some point that talks around navigating some of those differences. But I think there's definitely bringing cultural awareness to what you're wanting to do in a feedback environment is also something that should be considered. Not considered, should be some part of that environment of feedback. Hey, this is all part of the soup that we're.
The last thing I wanted to add to this is not just the getting permission, but it's the giving permission. And I've got a story, and I've told this story a few times. I don't know if we've talked about it before, but I've and we'll talk maybe a little bit more next week about performance improvement plans and the ones I've been on. And one of the bits of feedback I got in the initial conversation was that people don't feel safe to give me feedback, right? And my thinking was, well, I've got an open door policy. I'm very welcoming. Like, people can talk to me about anything. I'm never going to do that. But I had never actually articulated that to them, right? To my direct reports. I'd never said, hey, you have permission to give me feedback. Do you have any feedback for me? And making that this regular thing. That's why, when I talked about having it in one-on-ones, that was one of the learned behaviors that I have just taken with me everywhere I go. And it's actually a bit of a tool because I'm so task-oriented and not people-oriented that I will forget, right? And I will lean into the work without taking a breath. So I use that as, a little bit of a tool. But we have to not just get permission, we have to give permission, especially as leaders too. That's one of our responsibilities, to create that space. Retros being a good example where that can happen. But So
cool.
All right. So we've talked about the cadence and having different things set up. We've talked about documenting your successes and your challenges, getting and giving permission for feedback. So that's a lot on the feedback side of it. And now we're just going to take a quick, we're running out of time. We've been talking about all this other stuff for a while, but this idea of a performance review, whatever it happens, we think there are some best practices, or we think there are some guides, some guidelines maybe that we can pass along from our experience that would be helpful to you as you go into performance review season. Now, when this episode airs, it may be just over for the Australian financial year, but it may just be coming up for the North American or the Western sort of Northwest, whatever. Europe and North America financial year. Yeah. So you put this one down, so I'm going to let you talk about it, which is how to present feedback that isn't yours or that you don't own? Because I remember we were planning this. You were like, oh, how do you had that.
Well, I had a moment, and I think once you're in leadership and you're in a larger organization, maybe this happens in smaller organizations too, but I had a situation where a really high performing team member had caused some ripples further up the leadership chain for whatever reason. And I was charged with giving them feedback about those ripples. And I did as I was charged and gave that feedback, and the fallout was catastrophic. And there were two reasons behind that. One, it was a surprise, and we'll talk about that further down the list. And it absolutely should not have been. And they were absolutely right to tear strips off me for that reason. And I give them full credit now for this having been so deeply embedded in my learning of what not to do. But the other thing that happened in that situation was I was giving feedback that I didn't believe in. I didn't agree with it, but I was new to management, and I was wanting to do right by my boss and the instruction that I'd been given. When what I would do now is really different. I would push back. I would dig in. I would really get to the core of why that feedback was being given and whether or not it was valid. And if it was valid, then have different conversations with the report that I was working with. Or if I didn't feel that it was valid, actually push back on leadership and go, I understand what you're saying, but this person is a real high performer. They are getting these results. The feedback that they are giving us is valid. And so those ripples may be yours to deal with rather than mine to have to pass back to them. Yeah.
And I think too, I would just add to that. I was going to add to that, but it's hard to add. And I'm thinking through all of the situations, all the caveats to it. But like, there will be times when you have to pass along feedback that you don't own, right?
And what I would do differently was actually get to that point where if this is valid and work through that, and then get it to a point where whether I own it or not, I buy into it and can then legitimately pass that on. Totally happy to do it and respect that there are times when that is needed. Totally learned that on a time.
So we'll talk a little bit more about surprises because I think that plays a big role in that. Well, why don't we just talk about that now? It's down the list, but we can just move it up.
Sure.
No surprises. So you mentioned that in that situation, the feedback that you were passing along was the first time that somebody's heard it. And my initial reaction to the whole idea of passing along feedback that I don't own is exactly that. Well, if they've never heard it and I've never heard it, why would I then jump in and provide that? I would want to push back on the timing of that feedback delivery and create some runway to assess and observe and see in their behavior if that was a one-off situation or if that is a repeated behavior that needs course correction. If it was a one-off and it rubbed people the wrong way, I can take that on and work that into my approach to providing that feedback as well, right? And do it in a context where that permission for giving feedback has been granted. But boy, do I have stories about surprises.
Are you going to share those stories, or you're just going to?
Next week, we're going to talk
to
about
what purpose would it do?
And so maybe this will be a little teaser for the next episode. That if you want the tea, you got to show up next week with the teacup or the glasses, because the library is about to open. No, I'm kidding.
I think that from the cadence perspective, the no surprises ever. If you have the cadence built in where you're having one-to-ones with your manager and feedback is coming up in that, and for me, it's this: don't save it up till you get to the end of the quarter, right? And so the no surprises may well be that if you're addressing a particular area of the performance, that should be clear throughout the one-to-ones and getting to that point. And hopefully by the time you get to the end of that quarter, that problem may well have already been 3/4 of the way to being addressed. But just that sense of
your feedback is a celebration of
exactly
momentum.
Yeah, success. Yeah. Great.
No, I completely agree. I think the cadence matters, and the you think about performance review, and if it's quarterly, that's one thing. Let's most have an annual performance review kind of thing that's a bit more formal, just for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And I think that as you're preparing for that and you're thinking about your feedback, those things that you've been discussing throughout the year, right? It won't be a surprise.
Right.
But I also think too, in a failure-friendly environment, those things are things you're discovering and working through together. So there's less pressure on that performance review as well, which brings us to the next one. So we've got presenting feedback that's not your own. Give yourself space and make sure you can at least get behind it. No surprises ever. Your cadence plays a big role in helping you combat that. If on a performance review, like a very meaningful performance review at a quarterly level or an annual level, that should never be the first time someone is hearing something. Right?
Exactly.
Even if it's new. If it is new, it is a new situation that has come up in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Or month, right? And you have not yet given that feedback in a setting outside of a formal performance review. If it was me, and others may approach this differently, but I would not include that in a performance review because that is not appropriate. It's a surprise. I would include that in my regular one-on-one cadence or in another less formal environment.
Yeah.
But that brings us to the next part, which is actually separating performance evaluations, performance reviews from pay conversations or compensation conversations, because that also happens in a lot of work environments where your annual review is tied to your pay rise, right? Or your lack of pay rise or your bonus or whatever.
Yeah.
And I personally think that those two should be separated.
Do you mean the performance evaluation conversation should be separate from my salary negotiation conversation?